A sound in the shadows ***. Imagine being alone in your house at night, surrounded by the safety of silence. The lights are off, the doors are locked. Everything seems peaceful, until you hear something. It's not the sound of the wind. It's not a creaking movement. It's something coming from inside the walls. Now think with me, if you heard suggestions, footsteps, or even knocking on the other side of the wall, what would you do? Would you call someone? Would you hear things? And most of all, what would you do if no one believed you? If this has never piqued your curiosity, get ready, because today on the Deep Horror channel, I'm going to tell you a story so disturbing that you'll see your house the same way again. If you're new here, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The story begins here ***. It was an ordinary night when I heard myself for the first time. I was in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, reading a book. Everything was quiet until something made my body freeze. A sound, low, distant, but unmistakable. A whisper. It was as if someone was on the other side of the wall. Maybe it was the wind or even a problem with the plumbing. But that same night the sound came back clearer this time. It was a plumbing. It wasn't the wind. They were faint, incomplete voices, but real. The next day I told my girlfriend, and who just laughed and said I was tired. But I knew I wasn't crazy, and she knew something was wrong with me. And that night the voices came back. But this time they weren't just whispering. I could hear laughter, soft and almost childish, echoing inside the walls. The feeling of something watching me became unbearable. I started to investigate. I looked behind furniture, knocked on the walls to look for something strange. Nothing. And then, in the deepest silence, I heard it. A clear, low, ominous voice. "Are you listening to us?" Finally. What would you do in my shoes? What would you do right now? Comment below, because things are about to get even scarier. And don't forget, if you're enjoying this story, share it with a friend. The more brave listeners, the better. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore what was behind the walls of my house, and why I was the only one who could hear it. One thing I can guarantee, you won't want to miss what happens next. Waiting for your approval to continue. The mystery deepens ***. I was terrified. I knew the sound was not a figment of my imagination. Someone or something was there. That night I tried to sleep, but the silence was deafening. Every noise seemed amplified, and the sensation that the walls were alive made me tremble. Then at 3 a.m. I heard it again. A slow, rhythmic knocking, as if someone was trying to get my attention. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from the wall next to my bed. I sat up, my heart racing, and asked hesitantly, "Who's there?" Silence took over. But before I could think about going back to sleep, the answer came. Not in words, but in a cold whisper, like a wind laden with secrets. "Help us." I felt the blood drain from my face. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room, locking the bedroom door behind me. I called Anne, who once again tried to reassure me. "And you told me I needed to relax. Maybe it's just the old building. Walls creak. They make noises. None of this is real." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Determined to find out what was going on, I began to investigate the history of the apartment. I discovered that the building had been built over 50 years ago, but there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary. However, when I spoke to the neighbors, an elderly man in the hallway said something strange to me. "You're new here, aren't you? This place, it has stories. But no one likes to talk about them. Maybe it's best if you don't mess with it." The beginning of the discoveries, I couldn't get those words out of my head. That same night, as I heard the whispers and knocks again, I decided to take action. I grabbed a flashlight and began to inspect every corner of the apartment. My search led me to a forgotten part of the living room closet, where I found something unexpected, a small crack in the wall. As I shone a light on the crack, I noticed something disturbing. Inside there were marks, scratches. They weren't natural, like those from a construction or renovation project. They looked like they had been made by human hands. Something or someone was trying to get out. Desperate and very disturbed, I grabbed a tool and started to open the crack. As I dug, I found a hidden compartment, a small cavity between the walls. Inside there was something strange, an old doll, dirty and with a sinister expression, and a crumpled piece of paper. When I opened the paper, it was written in shaky letters. "They got me. Don't let them get you too." Engagement and mystery. If you were in my place, would you continue investigating or would you run away from there immediately? Leave your comment. Let's see how many of you would have the courage to continue. I tried to understand the meaning of the message. Who wrote it? And more importantly, what did "they got me" mean? The chills in my spine returned when the doll seemed to smile for a moment. I dropped the object on the floor and ran to my room, locking myself in again. The voice becomes clearer. As I tried to process everything, the sound changed. It was no longer whispers or knocks. Now it was a clear voice speaking directly. You saw it. You know, they come at night. I held the phone ready to call for help, but before I could dial, the lights began to flicker. Suddenly, everything went silent again. The apartment was completely dark. And then a sound made me freeze. Something was scratching at the bedroom door. I knew I was no longer alone. Make the audience curious. What could be trying to get into my room? Stay with me to discover the terrifying truth behind the walls of this apartment. If you haven't subscribed to the Deep Horror channel yet, what are you waiting for? Like it and share it with a brave friend. The danger reveals itself ***. I stood in the room listening to the scratching on the bedroom door. It was slow, as if something was testing its patience. I barely breathed, afraid that any movement would reveal its location. The phone trembled in my hand, but when I tried to call the call didn't go through. No signal, I thought, feeling a lump in my throat. The scratching stopped suddenly. The silence was even more terrifying. I stood up carefully, trying to listen better. That's when a whisper cut through the air. It wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was inside the room. You shouldn't have opened it. I turned quickly, the flashlight shaking in my hand. But the room was empty. I started walking towards the window, thinking maybe it was the wind, a draft. But before I could reach the curtains, I felt something brush against my arm. It wasn't human. It was cold, damp, as if the darkness itself was touching my skin. The apartments passed. Terrified, I decided to run away. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment without looking back. In the hallway, I knocked on the door of the elderly neighbor who had mentioned the stories. He opened the door slowly, seeming to already know the reason for my visit. I told you not to mess with that, he said, shaking his head. I insisted, demanding that he explain what was happening. After a long sigh, the man finally began to speak. Decades ago, there was a family who lived in your apartment. A mother, a father, and 2 small children. They disappeared in an inexplicable way. The police never found their bodies, but they said they heard strange sounds, voices, laughter. I got goosebumps. I felt a chill down my spine. And what happened to the apartment? The man looked at me with tired eyes. It was empty for years. The people who moved in didn't stay long. They say the family never left, that they are trapped in the walls. A new terror. Back in the apartment, I decided that I couldn't just run away. Something inside me knew that if I didn't face this, I would never have peace. I went back to where I had found the doll and began to dig deeper into the wall. Now, with the proper tools, I opened a larger hole, revealing a narrow tunnel that seemed to extend into the foundations of the building. Holding a flashlight, I entered. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the walls covered in nail marks as if someone had tried to escape from there. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. After a few meters, I found something that made me stop. An old wooden door with strange symbols engraved on it. I hesitated, but the voice came back. Now it sounded desperate. Help us, please. With my heart racing, I pushed the door open. Behind it, a dark, empty room. In the center, a rocking chair where the doll now sat. The encounter. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind her. I tried to open it, but it was useless. The voice was all around me now, whispering in several languages, laughing, crying. And then, in unison, they said, "You shouldn't be here." The chair began to rock on its own. The doll tilted its head as if it were looking directly at me. And then the doll spoke in a voice that seemed to come from every corner. "You freed them. Now they come for you." I screamed, backing up to the wall. It was then that I saw the shadows emerging. They weren't human. They weren't solid. They were distorted shapes, as if they were part of the environment itself. They approached, reaching out hands made of pure emptiness. Engagement and mystery. And now, what do you think happened? What was this dark mystery? The last request. As the shadows surrounded her, I remembered the paper I had found with the doll. Don't let them get you too. I began to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the void. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the doll smiling again, this time in a devilish way. The price of truth ***. I woke up in complete darkness. It felt suffocating, as if the air around me had been drained. My head was pounding and my body felt heavy, as if something were holding me to the ground. Everything around me was silent. That deep, unnatural silence that makes your heart race. Suddenly, a faint light appeared in the distance. It seemed to pulse as if it were alive. I felt an irresistible force pulling me towards the light, even though I didn't know what awaited me. Each step echoed as if I were walking through an infinite void, until I finally reached the source of that light. It was the same room I had entered before, but now it seemed different. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, the same ones engraved on the door. The doll was still in the rocking chair, but now it was not alone. Behind it, shadowy figures floated, slowly taking shape. They were faces. Faces of people who seemed distorted, trapped in eternal agony. The revelation. I couldn't look away. One of the figures spoke, with a voice that seemed to come from every corner at once. You freed them, but we are still trapped. We have always been here, waiting for someone like you. I tried to speak, but my voice seemed to fail. The figure continued, they locked us here. The ones who came before you. They thought they could silence us, but you opened the door. Now we are free, and you will take our place. The entity's words hit me like a blow. Then I understood everything in that instant. The apartment was a trap, an endless cycle. Those who discovered the secret were taken inside the walls, while the entities were given a new chance to escape. But there was something different about me. I was not like the others. Somehow I managed to resist their presence. The shadows hesitated to approach, as if I were a threat. You have a choice, me, the figure said. You can fight us, but it will be useless. Or you can accept your fate and spare yourself the suffering. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voice in my mind. I remembered the paper I had found, the desperate words of those who had come before. Don't let them get you too. That wasn't just a warning. It was a strategy. I won't take anyone's place, I said, finally gathering strength. And I won't let you leave. With that, I began to search for something, anything that could free me. It was then that I saw a rusty blade on the floor, probably left by someone who had tried to escape in the past. I picked up the blade and began to scratch the same symbols from the walls into the floor around me, like a circle of protection. The figures screamed in fury, their shadows writhing as if they were being burned. You can't stop us, they roared. But I kept going. Each symbol seemed to weaken them more, until the light in the room began to shine brightly, blinding her. The liberation. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the apartment. The tunnel had disappeared and the walls were intact. The silence was now real, no whispers, no knocking. I looked at the clock and realized that barely an hour had passed since everything had started. I grabbed my things and left the apartment without looking back. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, but I knew I could never forget. However, something bothered me, the feeling that somehow that place was still watching me, waiting for the next person. What do you think happened to me? I managed to break the cycle. And you, would you have the courage to open that door? Deep horror. Just as you faced my fears, you can face more stories like this. Don't forget to leave a like and share with that friend who loves a good mystery. And, of course, watch the next suggested video because there is still much more lurking in the shadows.